Daniel's 70th week prophecy, Part 3. What must come before the 70th week? How, when, and what? How will it happen? When will it happen? And what will occur during? Daniel's 70th week prophecy, Part 3, will contain 4 chapters. In Chapter 1, we'll discuss where we've been and where we are now. In Chapter 2, a tale of 2 prophecies, where things could be heading shortly. In Chapter 3, the leader and the treaty. And in Chapter 4, other key prophecies that we typically forget about, and also a Part 3 review and the appendices. Welcome to Chapter 1, where we've been and where we are now. In this chapter, we'll have a brief introduction and acknowledgments, and we'll talk about not so long ago, and why it's not a Roman beast, the characteristics of Islam, and Islamic end-time belief. This is Part 3 of my study on the 70th week of Daniel. If you saw Parts 1 and 2, you know that I'm really trying to present a high-level view of the how, what, and when of the 70th week of Daniel. This study comprises many personal hours of study from men of God who have spent countless years studying and preaching about end-time events and what they see God revealing to us so that we can prepare ourselves and warn others of soon-to-occur events before it catches them unawares. I will provide links and reading suggestions throughout for those who want to dive deeper into a particular topic to fill in any gaps. Now, this is not meant to be an exhaustive presentation. In this particular study, my goal is to show that there are a lot of things that need to happen before the 70th week can begin. But, given the speed of recent geopolitical events, it is not too far-fetched that we could see the emergence of the final beast empire in the near future, possibly in time for our 2014 time period, as spoken of in Part 2 of my study. So buckle up, because here we go. First, I'd like to acknowledge a few folks. These men have been true Bereans, seeking out the Word of God and studying the signs of the times, and their published works have provided me with many insights that I will try to distill here. And though I might not agree with all their conclusions, I have gleaned so much from them, and I believe God has used them to help peel back the onion, so to speak, to reveal His end-time prophetic truth. So please take time to look these people up and the resources they provide. Joel Richardson has written a couple great books, The Islamic Antichrist and The Mideast Beast. Walid Shoabat, who with Joel Richardson wrote the book God's War on Terror. Pastor Marvin Rosenthal wrote the great book The Pre-Wrath Rapture of the Church. And Robert Van Kampen wrote the books The Sign and The Rapture Question Answered. Joel Rosenberg, well, he's written many books, but his latest, 12th Imam trilogy, is great. Rabbi Jonathan Cahn has written the bestseller, The Harbinger. And there are others too many to mention here. What must precede the 70th week of Daniel? Well, just as a brief introduction to this topic, there are several geopolitical events that must occur before the 70th week of Daniel that we'll discuss here in this study. First, the emergence of the fourth beast empire as envisioned by the prophet Daniel in Daniel 2 and in Daniel 7. In this chapter, I will identify where a greater consensus of teachers indicate this empire will emerge from. Second, the defeat of 3 of the 10 nations that will initially unite to form this empire, thus creating the final 8-nation beast empire, and I will discuss this more in Chapter 2. Third, the emergence of the leader of this final empire who will sign a 7-year peace treaty with Israel to usher in a time of, quote, peace and safety, unquote, but will actually begin the final 7 years of this age. In Chapter 3, we'll look more at this leader and what the peace treaty may look like and how events may follow after it is signed. And fourth, there are a few obscure prophecies that may be in process right now that will occur in the, quote, end times, unquote, involving Egypt, Syria, and the mystery Babylon that I believe occurred just before or not long after the beast or Antichrist emerges that we'll talk about in Chapter 4. But before we get there, we need to see where we've been. It was not so long ago that the world was under the shadow of the world-dominating threat from the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or commonly referred to as the Soviet Union. From 1917 through 1989, in just over 70 years, this communist regime threatened to take over the world and to subjugate everyone under this atheistic evil system. All Bible prophecies seem to speculate that the Antichrist would arise from Moscow, Russia, or Romania, or one of the other Soviet states. Especially starting in the late 1960s, many books have been written to this effect from truly honorable men who were understandably looking at the then seemingly evident signs of the times. But in 1989, the USSR collapsed without a shot being fired. With the fall of the USSR, many Christians became confused and were left to ask, if not from the USSR, then where will the Antichrist come from? And understandably, doubt has crept into the church, and scoffers have arisen to declare all this prophecy stuff as being irrelevant or impossible to decipher. And adding to this confusion are those who, even now, doggedly hold on to the view that Russia, or one of the other former Soviet republics, will still arise to take over the world, even if it absolutely does not make sense. And this is not to say that Russia will not play some role in end-time events, however. They just won't be leading the way. So it was not so long ago that we were left to ponder where the Antichrist would arise from. Maybe the Catholic Pope would be the Antichrist. But he isn't a great leader of a conglomeration of nations. And if not the USSR, well then surely it will be the European Union that would take over the world. Possibly the King of Spain would arise as the leader to sign the 7-year peace treaty with Israel. However, that didn't work out very well either when the EU added more than 10 nations to the Union. There are 27 member states now. Maybe it will be those European countries that adopt the euro currency. Because after all, the Antichrist will make us all use one currency, right? Well, now there are 23 nations that use the euro. That too is more than the 10 nations. That will become 8 nations when the Antichrist defeats 3 of them to make up the final 8-nation beast empire. So if not the USSR or Europe, then where will the beast empire rise from? Well, it was not so long ago that we were confronted with a global threat that came seemingly out of nowhere to hijack 4 airliners on a beautiful Tuesday morning in 2001, to knock down the Twin Towers in New York, and to take out one side of the Pentagon. And it was crazy to think, way back in 2001, that Islam may vie for world domination. After all, the Islamic Caliphate had been destroyed back in 1923, following World War I, with the fall of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. Virtually all the Islamic countries were controlled by strong dictators, and none were united or even contemplated becoming united in a caliphate again. And suddenly, in 2006, the author Joel Richardson was led to write a book entitled Antichrist, Islam's Awaited Messiah, later republished as The Islamic Antichrist, The Shocking Truth About the Real Nature of the Beast, from WorldNet Daily Books. These were the first books I ever read that spoke about what the Quran and the Islamic commentaries, known as the Hadiths, have to say about what they are expecting in the end times. In brief, their Mahdi wants to fulfill all of the biblical prophecies of the Antichrist, including the signing of the 7-year peace treaty with Israel, and riding into Jerusalem on a white horse and everything else, and he wants to bring the entire world under the Islamic banner. And even back in 2006, it was crazy to think that the Islamic nations would unite to form the Islamic Caliphate. Joel Richardson, Walid Shoabat, and others, like myself, were considered lunatics to even think that that was a possibility. Then came the, quote, Arab Spring, unquote, of 2011. And now, suddenly, there is a full-on push to revive the Islamic Caliphate under the banner of the Muslim Brotherhood. But there are some who still insist that the Antichrist will be Roman, or from Rome, or from a revived Roman Empire. They cite that Rome is the city on, quote, 7 hills, unquote, which definitely means that it is the place where the Antichrist comes from, right? Well, this prophecy in Revelation, specifically Revelation 17, 9 through 11, was not about a city on 7 hills, but the woman was riding a beast with 7 heads that were also, quote, 7 hills, unquote, or empires. The 7th hill or empire would fall, and an 8th would arise that would be the revived 7th empire. And however, on this list of empires, Rome was the 6th empire that was in existence in John's day, not the 7th. The 7th empire was yet to come from the Apostle John's perspective. Here are the 7 empires that have controlled Jerusalem, with the 8th still to come. The first was Egypt, the second was Assyria, the third was Babylon, the fourth was Media-Persia, the fifth was Greece, the 6th was Rome, and John was living during this empire. The 7th was the Ottoman Turks, and the 8th is the revived 7th empire. Well, they cite that the Roman Empire, like the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, and the Grecian Empire, controlled Jerusalem. Hence, it must be the, quote, legs of iron, unquote, as seen in the statue of Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 2. Hence, it will lead the final empire, or feet of iron mixed with clay, at the base of the statue. Right? Well, it must be remembered that the prophecy of the statue in Daniel 2 is about those empires that would come after and control Babylon following Nebuchadnezzar, not Jerusalem. This and Daniel's beast prophecy in Daniel 7 are notably the only prophecies that are Babylon-focused rather than Jerusalem-focused, because Daniel was in Babylon during the Jewish captivity there. And Rome historically never fully conquered nor controlled the whole empire of Babylon. They did occupy the city briefly a couple of times in 116 AD and in 166 AD. Joel Richardson, in his new book, The Mideast Beast from WorldNet Daily Books, states the following problem with trying to identify the Roman Empire as the 4th empire of the statue in Daniel 2 and as the 4th beast in Daniel 7:23. Quote, the first problem with the Roman identification of the 4th kingdom is that the Roman Empire does not meet the specific criterion of Daniel 2:40. This verse, speaking of the nature of the rise of the 4th kingdom, says that when it emerged, it would crush all 3 of the other kingdoms. Quote, and the 4th kingdom shall be as strong as iron, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Unquote. Emphasis mine. And also, later in Daniel 7, speaking of this same empire, we find a very similar description. Quote, thus he said, as for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, and trample it down, and break it to pieces. Unquote. Emphasis mine. As you'll see in the next slide, Rome never fully conquered all of the areas covered by the Babylonian, Medo-Persian, and Grecian empires. And they also never, quote, crushed, unquote, those areas they conquered. Instead, though they subjugated them, they also allowed the local customs, cultures, religions, and laws to exist during their reign. Here's a map of the Middle East with Babylon in the center, and this is the full extent of the Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar. In Daniel chapter 2, it prophesies about those empires that will come and conquer Babylon in the future. Babylon was conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire, and here is a partial extent of that empire covering much of the Middle East. The Medo-Persian Empire was then conquered by the Grecian Empire under Alexander the Great. And here is a partial extent of the Seleucid Greek Empire. I focus on the Seleucid Greek Empire because this is where Antiochus Epiphanes comes from, who is a precursor of the Antichrist. The Greek Empire was then conquered by the Roman Empire, and this is the area that was long controlled from 14 BC to 568 AD by the Roman Empire. But Rome only briefly entered Babylon in 116 AD and in 166 AD, and it never crushed the Babylonian, Persian, or Greek empires. But here is a partial extent of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, covering the entire Middle East, North Africa, and Southern Europe. Islam absolutely crushed all of the ancient empires before it, subjugating all religions, cultures, and laws of the conquered lands under the Quran and Sharia law. Finally, those who argue in support of the Roman beast theory ask the following question: but doesn't it say in Daniel 9, quote, "The people of the prince," i.e. the Antichrist, "who shall come will destroy the city and sanctuary," unquote, as found in Daniel 9:26? Well, this is a prophecy of the future destruction of the Second Temple. And this infers that the Antichrist will be, quote, "Roman," unquote, because Titus, the Roman general, destroyed the city of Jerusalem and Second Temple in 70 AD. However, many scholars have discovered that the Roman legions that sacked Jerusalem and destroyed the temple were not Roman in ethnicity. In fact, by 70 AD, the bulk of the legions in the Roman military were conscripted Eastern soldiers, particularly from Syria, Egypt, and Turkey. And also, a legion of various Arab fighters joined in the destruction of the temple. General Titus actually told his troops to not destroy the temple, so as to keep it as a prize for Caesar and to erect Caesar's statue to be worshipped there. And he tried to stop the destruction when things got out of control. So the, quote, "people of the prince who is to come," unquote, are actually predecessors of the Turks, Syrians, Egyptians, and Arabs, i.e., they are all Muslims. Many still today contend that Islam is the, quote, "religion of peace," unquote. Just ask those countries and cultures conquered by Islam and subjected under Sharia law just how, quote, "peaceful," unquote, Islam really is. So does Islam crush the cultures it conquers as prophesied in Daniel 2 and in Daniel 7? Well, initially it forced all of the conquered peoples to convert or die, and thousands upon thousands of people who did not convert were beheaded in the name of Islam. Later, they forced non-converts into a subservient state called dhimitude, or as defined here from the dhimitude.org website. Quote, "Dhimitude is the Islamic system of governing populations conquered by jihad wars, encompassing all of the demographic, ethnic, and religious aspects of the political system. The word dhimitude as a historical concept was coined by Bat-Yor in 1983 to describe the legal and social conditions of Jews and Christians subjected to Islamic rule. The word dhimitude comes from dhimmi, an Arabic word meaning, quote, "protected," unquote. Dhimmi was the name applied by the Arab Muslim conquerors to indigenous non-Muslim populations who surrendered by treaty, the dhimma, to Muslim domination. Dhimmis are forced to pay the, quote, "jizya tax," unquote. That is, to pay a tax to the Muslim government. In Arabic it means, quote, "what is taken from the dhimmis," which is the amount of money agreed upon in the contract that gives the non-Muslim the dhimmi status, and it's derived from the act of the verb, quote, "reward," unquote, as if it, the jizya tax, is a requital for not being killed, unquote. So does Islam, quote, "crush the lands it conquers"? Just ask yourself, where are the remnants of the Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Greek, and Roman empires in the Middle East? The simple answer? There are none. When we think of the Middle East, we think of it solely as an area that is Muslim in culture, religion, and laws. In fact, because Islam is so dominant, we take it for granted that the Middle East is naturally Islamic and has always been that way. Virtually all remnants of the cultures that came before are gone, in ruin, or highly suppressed. In the Muslim lands, there is only one true God, Allah, and there is only one true law, Sharia. Joel Richardson says in his book, The Islamic Antichrist, from WorldNet Daily Books, quote, I have heard Bible teachers for years express that before the coming of the last days, Islam as a religion would basically fizzle out and become entirely irrelevant. The present reality and long-term statistical trends, however, simply do not bear this out. The other option, a far more reasonable one, is to conclude that the Antichrist's empire indeed will be Islamic. This fact alone should make most Bible scholars and students of eschatology consider the role of Islam in the last days very seriously. Unquote. Emphasis mine. So we, you and I, have got to take what is going on in the Middle East today very seriously. The pieces are being put in place for the final cosmic conflict right now. The goal of virtually every Muslim, especially in the Middle East, is to have the Caliphate reestablished and to have their Mahdi usher in a new golden age of Islam, where Islam will become the religion of the world. They have been bereft since 1923, when the Ottoman Turkish Empire collapsed. Now they see their chance to obtain their long-dreamed-of goal. Just go online and read articles and listen to the speeches pushing for the Caliphate to return. They envision a world of justice and righteousness that is free from Jews and polytheistic Christians, a world that will once again worship the one true God, Allah, and be subject under the one true law, Sharia. Here is a very brief primer on Islamic end-time belief. First, I highly recommend Joel Richardson's book, The Islamic Antichrist, from WorldNet Daily Books, to get the whole picture of Islamic eschatology. And here is a synopsis in a couple paragraphs. Their Mahdi will conquer Jerusalem. He will sign a 7-year peace treaty with the Jews, specifically a descendant of Aaron, a temple priest, in other words. And he will establish the capital of the Caliphate from Jerusalem. He will ride into Jerusalem on a white horse as a conqueror, and he will change the times and seasons to the Muslim calendar. Their Jesus, yes, they have a Jesus, and he is called Isa al-Masih, Jesus the Messiah. He will descend from a minaret of a mosque in Damascus via the help of some angels. And he is not the, quote, Son of God, unquote, but is subservient to the Mahdi. He is a Muslim, and he will abolish the jizya tax referred to earlier. This means that he abolishes dhimitude. All must either convert to Islam and serve Allah's representative, the Mahdi, or die by beheading. He will lead the killing of all Jews and Christians he can find. Finally, their Jesus will lead the Muslim armies against their arch-enemy, the Dajjal, their Antichrist, who is also known as the King of the Jews. Thank you for watching Chapter 1. As you can see, the plot is thickening. Please continue on to Chapter 2 for more of Part 3 of my study on Daniel's 70th week prophecy. In Chapter 2, we'll discuss a tale of two prophecies, where things could be heading shortly.